Hey everybody, welcome back to Black Lotus, where we talk about all things strange and unusual. And tonight, first of all, I got to say we will not have Michael Roser with us from Dark Hour. And the reason being is because he is in Montauk, on Montauk Island, doing an investigation into that facility there. But tonight we have Mike Ricksecker with us. And Mike is known as an investigator and researcher into shadow people. And my wife and Ralph and I have had our own experiences with shadow people here at our house. And I'm sorry, say again, Kim?
I said same here.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it was great. And this was kind of a last minute set up for the interview because we had somebody else set up for it, but they canceled on us at the last minute. So thankfully, I got a hold of Mike's, what would you call it, publicist, and
right.
She got Mike with this really quick, and I'm very appreciative of her. Her name is Michelle Reed, So the last time I caught up with you, Mike, you were getting prepared to go to Egypt.
Yeah.
How did that turn out?
Oh, Egypt was absolutely fantastic. It was 2 weeks out there, and it was the beginning of June, beginning to mid-June. And it was just, the sun was blazing, so it was hot. But we had special access to the Great Pyramid for 2 hours, just our little group. We had about 10 people on the summer solstice. And so having that opportunity was amazing, going there to see all the temples, and we got into other pyramids. And with COVID right now and people not really being up for traveling, the number of tourists was really suppressed there. So we had some of those sites just all to ourselves, which was absolutely amazing.
Wonderful.
So being able to dive into the ancient mysteries of Egypt and being able to walk through these locations that are just absolutely legendary is amazing. So I've put together a exploring ancient mysteries of Egypt on my Connected Universe portal site.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that a little later. Mm-hmm. But did you do any investigations into shadow people while you were there?
We talked about it a little bit. That wasn't really the focus of the tour. Ours was, the name of the tour was Return of the Kepler Cycle. So we were examining more of the return of the renewing of the sun cycle. So the Kepler represents the first stage of the cycles of the sun, and so being there on the summer solstice, that was kind of our primary thing. We did talk and get into shadow people a little bit, and I'll be presenting some of that material a bit later on. But we got into some of the different ancient mysteries like stargates and portals and Atlantis, and some of the ideas and concepts about shadow people may be related to portal activity anyway.
I was going to ask you about that since you brought it up. Yeah, because that sounds really interesting.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, in regards to the portals and shadow activity, because it sounds like there was a question there. And that was part of my focus of the Shadow Dimension docu-series was, we were going to these locations like the Conjuring House, like Mineral Springs Hotel in Alton, Illinois, searching for shadow activity and why it occurred there. But our focus was geared toward the fact that these locations have had reported portal activity, and is it through this energy that's there that these shadow entities are spawned?
Okay, that's interesting.
If I could jump in, I just have two questions right off the bat. So I know you're super into shadow people, super into portals. Now, I've thought about these concepts, so I have my own hypothesis. Now, this is what I think is going on, but I haven't tested it, so I could be completely wrong. But I want to get your opinion. Sure. So as far as shadow people, I will say broadly, I believe there are several different explanations for shadow people. So not just one. So I think a lot of the ones that people put forward are valid, but I think it's not exclusive. It's not exclusive. I feel like shadow people is being caused by multiple independent things. And as far as portals, my thought is that portals occur naturally some places on Earth, and things may take advantage of them. But I also think people or some kind of intelligence could make a portal artificially if they wanted to. So those are just some broad statements, but I'd love just to hear your feedback.
Yeah, okay, let's break that down a little bit. So I believe you are correct when it comes to shadow entities, that these are not just one thing, that they are many things. And that's always a tough question, or a tough question for me to answer, is when somebody just simply asks, okay, what's a shadow person? And it's like, well, there are many different answers for that. It's not just one thing. Some, and that's part of a big part of what my book, A Walk in the Shadows, does, is it breaks down a lot of those different things. So, some are just human spirits that can't fully manifest. Some are interdimensional beings. Some are extraterrestrials. Some may be time travelers. They are a lot of different things. When it comes to portals, I also agree with you. So it sounds like we're on the same page here, because some of them are naturally occurring. When you look at some of the these magnetic places on the Earth, where you find this vortex activity that's spawning off these different portals, where you have the telluric currents running through the Earth, and sometimes they cross and they create these this different supernatural phenomena, one of them being the portals. They can also be man-made, and that was my hypothesis for the Conjuring house, where they get shadow activity, they have hauntings, they have there's UFO sightings there. They've had time slips. It's a lot more than just, well, the movie the movie didn't accurately portray it anyway, but it's a lot more than just the haunting there with the parents. They had things happening before the parents, a lot of different things happening with the parents. There were things happening afterward. But at the and the thing with the parents was, it wasn't a demonic possession. It was a seance that had gone bad anyway. That was the main thing. But when you look at that house, there is a room in the basement that they call the well room, because there is an old open well that's there. It still has water in it. It's still open. Pretty
cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. So you have this water that's there, and the way the room is constructed, it has limestone walls that are capped with granite. And so you have like this perfect little power plant that's down there, and the main things, the primary things that have happened in that house, like the time slips, the shadow entities, and the top story, the top floor room there that have been witnessed by multiple people. The seance that went bad. It's like everything. If you just took a column straight up from that room in the basement and just drew it straight up, it's like you see all these things that have happened.
I've heard that a lot of paranormal activity happens around water. And, and so I wonder about that well, but I know that, like in Ohio, there's a lot of paranormal activity that happens there, and specifically alongside that river that's in Ohio. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, water is definitely a conductor of supernatural activity. There are, quite a few rivers in Ohio. Well, you have the Ohio River, sure, which...
That's the one I'm thinking of,
Yeah, and then I spent a lot of time spent 3 years or 2 years in Illinois, but several years investigating out there. And the second part of the shadow mention is at Mineral Springs Hotel in Alton, Illinois, which is right along the Mississippi River. And so one of our studies does have to do with this being right along the Mississippi. And this actually has, there was an old mineral spring in the basement, which it's been filled in with junk, but it's still pretty much an open hole. It hasn't been completely filled in. And so, we believe that a lot of that activity stems from there. We have a moment there, during the docu-series in which we were out there with the dowsing rods, and just within seconds, boom, they're pointing right at that old mineral spring. So yeah, water is definitely a conductor for these things.
So if I could add something to that water thing real fast, if I could just piggyback off of that.
Sure.
So the connection between paranormal and water is interesting for a number of reasons. Biologically, I'm like, if we look at water itself, like the ocean or lakes, we know that it supports a great variety of life, just different living things. We also know that water, like the ocean, supports really, really large forms of life. So in other words, extreme forms of life. And even like something like a well, like for a well, for instance, if people don't know, but basically some well science, like wherever you are in the world, if you start digging, even if you're in a desert, you will eventually hit water, okay? It depends how much you have to dig. If you're in the mountains, you might just dig like a little puddle, a little hole, and it'll fill up with water. Because the water's coming from the water table. So the water table is above all of us, but for some people it's much deeper. So when you're digging that hole, you're basically tapping in to this huge, well, it depends. That's the thing I was going to say. Some wells may tap into like a huge underwater aquifer, like a very large hollow area under the earth, which holds water. And because it's so large, it might hold some of these exotic forms of life. And then when you dig the well, that's physically connecting the aquifer with yourself, basically.
Interesting thought.
Let's talk about A Walk in the Shadows. What inspired you to write this?
Well, a number of different things. First of all, one of my very first paranormal experiences, the first real significant paranormal experience that I had when I was a child was with a shadow person. I was about 8 years old, woke up in the middle of the night, and there was this tall, dark figure standing in the corner of my room. Of course, I had no idea at the time that, it was a shadow person or a shadow being or whatever you want to call it. I just thought there was an intruder in my room and the thing was about to kill me. And that's about what you think at the age of 8. It didn't do that. Of course, I'm still alive to tell the tale, which is a good thing. But did do something very unusual. It actually approached my bed, leaned over. I'm trying to scream. My mouth opens up. Nothing's coming out because I'm just too terrified. And as it's leaning over my bed, I'm just like staring up into this black face. There's nothing there. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Nothing. And then it grabbed me by the wrists, crossed my arms across my body, and then it ran off down the hall. By then, I found my voice, found my legs, ran off to my parents' bedroom screaming. They tried to tell me that I had just had a bad dream, but I had been awake for this whole thing. So that was the first significant experience. I had another experience when I was 13, and we had moved, and the house that we moved into had some sort of shadowy figure there that I kept seeing. Very, very different than the one that I experienced when I was 8. And then as I got older and I got into investigating the paranormal, and I started seeing a lot of these things on investigations. So I'd already been a writer. I'd been writing about a lot of different things, wrote, my first book was a mystery novel. I had the Ghosts of Maryland book, Ghosts and Legends of Oklahoma. So I'm going to these different, whether it's a conference or book signing or what have you, and I'm giving these different presentations, and people kept asking me more and more about shadow entities or telling me stories about shadows that they had seen. So this was like a recurring theme. So I started doing presentations on shadow entities, my experiences along with experiences people had shared or things that I'd seen on investigations. And so at some point it just became natural, since I was a writer, to go ahead and write this book and kind of help to shed some light on the subject to people, because there's I think there's a lot of misinformation in the field as to who or what shadow entities are. We kind of alluded to that earlier, where they can be a lot of different things, where a lot of people are kind of just focused, on they're dark, so they must be evil or they must be demonic or what have you. And yeah, there are some that are more nefarious than others, but to me, shadow people are like humans, where some are good, some are bad. And it might be a little simplistic, but to me, that's been the case. You do see some good ones, you do see some bad ones, and that's one of the things I wanted to shed light on, as well as share all these different experiences that people had.
What do you think they want?
I'm sorry?
What do you think they want?
Again, it kind of comes down to the specific shadow entity. Some are just human spirits, and they're only manifesting as a shadow. good story by my friend Rob Guttrow. One was his aunt that appeared to him and wanted him to deliver a message to his mother, which was her sister. So there was a specific agenda there. Others just seem to be watching, staring, observing, collecting information or data, and so they creep people out, but they don't necessarily do anything either. They just kind of stand there. So it depends on the particular shadow.
Well, I was going to kind of jump off of that, if you don't mind. I was going to jump off of that. My question was similar to Ralph's, but I was going to be more specific. Now that you've done all this research and you've learned about a lot of the different types of shadow people, what do you think that one wanted when you were 8, that it had crossed your arms? Why do you think it did that? Do you think it was somebody you may have known, or?
That's a good question. I don't believe that it was somebody that I knew. I was only 8. I didn't know a lot of people by that by that point. So for a long time, I wasn't sure what it was or what it was trying to do. And as a child, I had been very scared of it. For a long time, I thought it was something that was kind of evil, nasty, nefarious. As I got older and I started writing and doing the interviews and all that, I had a couple of people along the way suggest to me that, perhaps when it saw me there sleeping for whatever reason, perhaps it thought that I was dead and was putting me into a burial pose, like you see on the old Egyptian sarcophagi with the crook and flail, like that, arms crossed, which, to me was an interesting idea, an interesting notion. And so I kind of went with that for a while. Some months back now, I did a hypnosis session. That was one of the things that we covered because I wanted to know more about this incident, because that is a question that I get a lot. And so, because I do think a lot of kind of quote unquote true shadow people are interdimensional beings, this kind of really played into that. And what came out of the hypnosis session is that this thing was from some other dimension. They called it a different space, which was kind of interesting. But basically, it was there watching and observing, studying humanity, wasn't really trying to scare me or anything like that. I didn't even know at first that I could see it. And when it realized that I was suddenly scared by its presence, that I could actually see it, the whole arms crossing thing was almost a kind of to give me like some sort of hug, like some sort of reassurance. And the vision that I got through this hypnosis session was it had crossed the arms, but then patted me like right in the middle of the arms too, and then took off. So it was a really different kind of vision of what happened that evening. But I think it gave me some reassurance that, okay, yes, many of these are interdimensional. And many of them are studying us just to learn more about us, and it not necessarily doing something evil, nasty, or nefarious.
So
you mentioned
almost like an alien type thing, because they're from different dimensions, different places. That could be just the same thing in a different form.
With the alien route, exactly. With the alien route, absolutely, they could be, because many extraterrestrials can simply be interdimensional travelers. They could be an ET from some other place in space-time, like a whole other dimension. Some may be physical. There is an idea out there that some of these physical extraterrestrials could be putting on some sort of suit, some sort of cloaking device, and maybe not quite understanding the physiology of our eyes, thinking that we're not going to be able to see it, that it'll be completely camouflaged. But it doesn't quite work with the way our eyes do, and so it comes off as a bit of a shadow, or some people talk about a shimmer man. So you have some different ideas here when it comes to ETs, either interdimensionally or
like
even
a cloaking
physical
device they use that as, right?
Right.
You mentioned
go ahead, sorry.
Oh, that's right. You mentioned Rob Guttrow. We just had him on the show last week. He's a great guy.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
He really is.
But can you tell me something? When the entity crossed your arms over your chest, what did that feel like? What did the touch feel like?
That's another question that I get a lot, and because people want to know, okay, did it feel electric or something like that, or did it feel cold? And honestly, it just felt like anybody else touching me. It didn't really feel special at all. It just felt like any other human, really. There was no electric feel, there was no cold. It was just felt like anybody else.
You did a lot of research into.
I was going to say a quick.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'll go after you.
No. All right.
I was just going to mention that. I was going to mention that when I was in when I was like 10 years old, I basically felt like a human hand. I was awake. I wasn't asleep. Middle of the day, and I felt like a human hand tried to stop me from closing a door. And I kind of freaked out because it was an invisible hand. But I closed the door anyway, and it ended up like smashing my mother's finger in a door. So if I read the situation, I feel like this is perhaps a shadow person, and they were trying to prevent something from happening. But the touch was like you said, it was just like a human, basically, like an invisible human was touching me.
Well, let's just say
that's pretty interesting. That it was trying to save your mother's finger from getting crushed. But but basically something like that. Yeah.
But you see, how do you differentiate between a ghost and a shadow person?
Good question, because some of them are ghosts, and basically what it comes down to is research and investigation. Just if you suddenly see a shadow crossing the hall, and somebody asks, "Okay, so what type of shadow was it?" Well, you don't know immediately. You're going to have to follow up on that and keep going back and trying to deduce. Is this a human spirit? Is this an ET? Is this some sort of interdimensional being? Could even be some sort of time slip, So you have to go back and do this investigation. Now, I have seen before where a shadow morphed into the apparition of a little girl in a location in which, we've already been talking about Mineral Springs a little bit. At a location which was known to have the spirit of a little girl up in this one room, and as it morphed into the apparition from the shadow, her apparition stopped right by that doorway that her spirit or ghost was always seen in or experienced in. And there are like 5 of us that saw her. What was really interesting about that is we all saw her, but all saw her a little bit differently. So like I saw her, in full form from the head on down to the knees, and then she dissipated away. Others saw her more fully formed from the feet, and then upward she started to dissipate away. So it was really kind of interesting how we all saw her differently, but from the shadow to the apparition. So that one to me is certainly, that one's a ghost, that one's a human spirit, but others, it's not as plain like that, and you're going to have to go back and do some more investigating.
Communication.
There was a thought
too.
Yeah, absolutely. Start trying to communicate. Ask some questions. Do some EVP work.
I was going to mention that. I think we're getting. I came to the conclusion. I think we're understanding why shadow people are so bizarre to us and why we have such a hard time understanding them. And I think it comes down to there are so many different causes of shadow people. So this is the scenario I'm envisioning. If you see a shadow person you haven't encountered, there are probably 1 million or several thousand different explanations. Like there's so many options that it could be, because there's that many different forms of poltergeist or shadow people. So it's really hard. It's not just like 1 or 3 things. You can't just say, oh, it's definitely a spirit. Oh, it's definitely an alien. Like, because there are so many possibilities, a human mind can't like grasp it. And it's very hard for us to ever truly understand what an individual, a shadow person was doing.
Yeah, you're right about that. We're, just the way we want things as humans, we're analytical beings. We want to compartmentalize and categorize things so that we can all put it in this nice little shoebox. Okay, I saw this. That's what this means, and be done with it. So that's why people ask, okay, what is a shadow person? Right. And it's like, well, that's that is not just a like one sentence answer, because they are, like you said, very many things that they could possibly be.
Well, do you think that they are shapeshifters? Do you think that they can shapeshift into different things? Like I've heard reports about shadow spiders and shadow snakes and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I do have a part in the book on shadow animals, and going back to Rob contributed to that because he has seen shadow pets. And kind of like with the apparition of the little girl, he's seen a half and half shadow and apparition dog before. So that's kind of interesting. So yeah, there are animals that do appear as shadows.
Yeah, I was thinking the same that when you was talking about the well with the house and everything with the little girl, it almost sounded similar to like Skinwalker Ranch, where things manifest like that too.
Yeah, the one homestead there, they have a lot of paranormal activity going on there, and Skinwalker Ranch is another one of these locations that has a lot of strange electromagnetic activity going on there. Something that seems to be within the ground that is causing all of this activity, and these shadow forms are definitely some of that.
And you mentioned that granite. Granite has a lot of quartz in it.
Mm-hmm.
And quartz is a conductor as well. It has a lot of energy.
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on the type of granite, it can have up to about 55% 55% quartz. Like when I was in Egypt, that was kind of the big thing that we were talking about, was with the rose quartz the rose granite from Aswan, which has about 55% quartz, and they were using that to basically at a lot of these different ancient sites of power to use that granite, use the quartz within it for the energy properties.
The water helps with it as well.
Yeah, and that was kind of kind of my point there with the Conjuring House, is you have all of these different basically starting from the water that's there in the well. You have that hole in the earth, you have the limestone, and then the granite on top. So it's all of that is generating energy within that house that these things are spawning from.
That and any cross lines of energy within the ground itself only adds to it.
Yeah, we don't know if there's. We'd have to do a bigger study to see if there are any titular currents running through the ground there, but very well could be.
You put a lot of research into A Walk in the Shadows, and obviously, but since you wrote that, you put out a second edition. Can you tell us what's new in that?
Yeah, the second edition. Because I put that out like only a year afterward. But within that first year after publishing it, there were a lot more people that had approached me with their different experiences. There were some things that I wanted to go back and clean up. But then I added some other material in there. I got a bit into light beings. People wanted to know more about skinwalkers and Wendigo, so I kind of fleshed out those sections a little bit. There were some other stories that I wanted to tell about hat-wearing entities, and one specifically with Albert K. Bender back in the 1950s. What's really interesting about his story, he was a gentleman that had founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau back in 1952 during the big UFO flap. And all of a sudden, a year later, he just shut it down. Now, this thing had gotten huge immediately when International was in the UK, Australia, like right off the bat. And you got to think, this is 1952. There's no internet. Phone calls are going to be extremely expensive if you're going long distance. So to put this organization together internationally by snail mail within a year like that is phenomenal. But he did. No. And then all of a sudden he shut it down, and nobody understood why for 10 years until the 1960s, where he puts out the book Flying Saucers and the Three Men, and basically tells everybody, hey, I wasn't allowed to talk about it, but here's what happened. He wasn't allowed to talk about it till these entities left the planet, and I guess they were supposed to be here for like 15 years. And what happened was, he had come home one night, went into his bedroom, and through the wall materialized these three shadowy entities wearing hats with glowing eyes. and they basically told him he had to stop with his UFO research. And he ended up listening to them. He believed that they were extraterrestrials, and they were here to harvest resources from Antarctica. That's what he believed about these things. Now, I hear that story, 3 shadowy hat-wearing entities with glowing eyes. I'm thinking shadow people. These are the classic Hatman type of stories. Other people hear this story and think, oh, these are the men in black. So to me, it's very interesting. Here you have this one story, and it has 3 different possibilities as to what these entities could actually be.
Mm-hmm.
But you only had the ones that's telling him to shut down the operation with the UFOs, though.
Yeah, they wanted him to stop his UFO research. So this was a story that I added to the book.
So how did he know that they left, that he was able to tell you?
Oh, he had it was a metal object that he had that was basically a gift from them that he kept in this box. And as long as it glowed, then they were still here on Earth. So he would periodically go back and check this object. And then one day he opened the box and the thing was completely gone.
Wow.
So he deduced that they had left the planet, and he told his story. Because there was a moment in time where, a few years after he had shut down the IFSB, that he wanted to tell the story, and like his wife kept prodding him for information about what had happened, and he was giving little bits and pieces and was like on the cusp of telling her the whole story, and he got another visit from the hat-wearing entities that told him, no, you're going to get in a lot of trouble if you go down that route, so don't.
Mm-hmm.
You got a new, I don't know how new it is, but you have a docu-series. I think it's on Tubi, but we watched it, and it was really good. Can you tell us about your experience with that?
Yeah, that's the Shadow Dimension. It is on Tubi. It's on some other platforms as well, but Tubi, you can watch it for free out there, which is great. 6-part doc that delves into this shadow phenomenon that we're talking about. So it starts off, with myself and several others recounting our experiences with shadow entities, and then we kind of get into a lot of the different ideas of who and what they are. We get into some of the ancient history about these things. We get into ancient Egypt, ancient Sumer, and even in more recent times, like spiritualism movement in America, where these things were talked about and witnessed. And then we actually go to the Conjuring House, where we're investigating this phenomenon. We're seeing if we can actually interact with it. Got a fantastic photograph, basically straight up, again, from that well room, in the room in question where Carl Johnson 40 years ago witnessed the shadow activity. We have Andrea Perrin, who's a part of that, recounting her experiences there at the farmhouse when she was a child. And then again, we go to Mineral Springs Hotel, kind of in search of again the shadow activity. So it's a study in this phenomenon, kind of going down the rabbit hole into some of the esoteric topics, but also investigating for current activity.
A lot of times you said that they're children that are seeing the shadows, but then again, you have to stop and think. Children see things that a lot of adults don't at that time too. From start to about 8 years old, they still have a lot of insight.
Yeah, because they're still more recently connected to that other plane of existence, and so children see a lot more than we give them credit for. And unfortunately, a lot of times when they see something, they try to tell an adult, and the adult just tries to pawn it off as, oh, it's just your imagination. It was just a dream. Now, like with my parents, I was about 8 years old, and they had tried to tell me that I had just had a dream, and at the time I was frightened. I was scared. I was screaming my head off, and they were being good parents and trying to console me and trying to calm me down, and they're trying to make me feel safe. So I understand why they told me that I had just had a bad dream.
And a lot of times take it passively too, as they just thought they've seen something and didn't, they'll just ignore it because they don't want to admit what they've seen. Whereas a child would be more curious.
Yeah, a child would be more curious, and unfortunately, you do hear these stories of like a child routinely seeing the same spirit in the house again and again and again, and the parent is just adamant, no, nothing's going on. So those cases are more sad because the child doesn't understand. I am seeing this, why won't you believe me? So those cases are unfortunate.
Putting down their senses as well.
Right.
I personally, I think that that's kind of a downfall of parenting, because I think everybody is born with this ability to see these things, and then it's just kind of beaten out of them, I mean, by their parents telling them, oh, you're just imagining things, and then later on in life, people just, they're no longer able to see these things because of that,
They've been conditioned that it's not real.
Right.
Yeah. And like I said, Ralph and my wife and I have had a shadow person here. We haven't seen it in about a year. But, we've all seen it. Even our cat has seen this thing. So they do exist, most definitely. And to be honest with you, up until about maybe 3 years ago, I had never heard of the Hat Man or shadow people.
Oh, we lost your sound,
Broke
Damien.
up a little bit there.
We can't hear you. No. Can't hear you. You might have a loose wire or something. But I did want to add that we've got a cat. We've got a shadow cat.
Okay.
That I have only seen it in a glimpse of my eye, walking by or something like that, but we'll feel it. It'll rub up against our leg and stuff like that. That's still here. But the shadow person is gone. So.
Yeah, there's just been somebody in passing. The shadow animals, we kind of talked about that a little bit with Rob, and yeah, shadow animals definitely exist. I've seen the cats at cemeteries, but sometimes you'll see them on investigations if you're a paranormal investigator, or like Rob has seen his dogs who have passed away. They'll come back and visit. And,
right.
Yeah.
I don't think the cat we have here is a shadow being. I think it's actually a spirit of a cat. That's just my feeling about it. But
spirit of a cat that comes off as a shadow. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It doesn't really come off as a shadow. It is black and it's got green eyes, and I see it a lot here in the studio as I'm passing by in the hallway. And I mean, and then I'll stop and I'll reach in the room and turn on the light, and the thing just dissipates. It's gone at that point.
Okay.
But
the apparition of a black cat. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that shadow person that used to hang out in the hallway, it wouldn't do anything. It would just like stand there and stare at us, and you catch it out of the corner of your eye, and as soon as you look, it's gone. And but it never really did anything nefarious. Really, it left a kind of a uneasy feeling in the room. But aside from that, we have a good friend of ours, Heidi Hollis, and she's all about the Hat Man and shadow people. And she's one who believes that they are all evil. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. She's certainly entitled to her opinion because she's done a hell of a lot more research than I ever have on the subject. But like I said, this thing didn't seem evil at all.
Yeah, I don't think that they're all evil. I think some are and some aren't, like you were talking about before, Mike.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Some are, some aren't. I've been on cases before where they have been a little more nefarious in nature, but they're few and far between. For the most part, they're rather benign. I do have a couple of stories within the book in which they've actually been benevolent in nature and where they've done things to actually help people. So it really depends on the specific agenda of that person. So
the energy
like with people, some are good, some are bad. You can't just sit there and say all of them are evil. And I understand, somebody I don't really want to specifically talk about Heidi, but from my understanding, she had some experiences when she was young in which they were negative. And yeah, some are. Interesting story that I do like to tell. from one in history was with Madame de Esperance. She was a physical medium during the spiritualism movement, and she specifically talked about the quote unquote shadow people all the time. Used that specific term, and in her experience, when she was young, she grew up in a haunted house, and she had both what she said were shadow people and ghosts, and she was actually afraid of the ghosts in that particular house, and the shadow people were her friends. And so when she experienced a ghost, she would go running off trying to find the shadow people to feel protected. But when she got, which is really quite different from what other people try to say. But when she got older, she moved out of that house, got married, moved into a different house, and this new house that she was living in, also had shadow entities in it. No ghosts in this particular one, apparently. But the shadow entities in this newer house weren't nice like the one when she was growing up. They were a little bit more nefarious in nature, and she didn't like those particular shadow people. So, here you have a figure in history that experienced shadows at two different locations and had two different opinions based on the location and the specific shadow entities.
I think, like I said, I think it has a lot to do with the energy of them as well. The
energy of the apparitions, or of the people that are seeing them.
Of the shadow people.
Okay.
I mean, because they're different. Why would the energy not be different as well?
It makes sense.
You hear a lot about sleep paralysis with people that claim that they are being abducted by aliens. But there's also a connection with shadow people and sleep paralysis. What do you think that's about?
Yeah, I have an entire section in the book, A Walk in the Shadows, on sleep paralysis. And there have been studies done by NIH, National Institutes of Health, on sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is a real biological phenomenon.
Sure.
Many people have experienced it. Think about, if I remember correctly, is it like 8% of the population experiences it on a regular basis? I've experienced it. Others certainly have. And here's my take, is that sleep paralysis is a real biological phenomenon, and shadow people are a real supernatural phenomenon, which can happen at the same time. Plenty of people experience sleep paralysis without ever seeing shadow people. Plenty of people see shadow people without experiencing sleep paralysis. In fact, many people see shadow people while they're wide awake doing something in the kitchen or walking down the hall or whatever. They'll see them out in the woods. So they can occur without the whole sleep paralysis component. However, there are times that this does actually happen. And so I have a bit of a problem with the medical community when they try to say that, well, shadow people are just a hallucination that people sometimes experience with sleep paralysis. Because, like I already said, we experience these shadow entities a lot of times without having anything to do with sleep at all. So that's one problem I have. Them saying that this is like a hallucination out of your dream, because what happens with sleep paralysis is your body naturally paralyzes you while you sleep so that you don't act out your dreams in the middle of the night. Again, very natural occurrence. But sometimes we wake up and we're not fully out of that paralysis state yet, and so we wake up and we're still paralyzed. Sometimes we're just partially paralyzed, like maybe an arm or a leg won't move. It can also happen in reverse, which is how it's happened to me, where your body just suddenly shuts down and you're wide awake. And this happened to me a couple of times, unfortunately, at work. And one time was when I was in the Air Force. You don't want to get caught sleeping on the job at work, but all of a sudden my body was just so exhausted, it physically shut down and my mind was still awake. So it's like I could hear everything that was going on around me, and this is not good. But I was able to get out of it. So, okay, their premise that this is just a hallucination. Well, another problem I have with that is we dream about a lot of different things when we sleep. People, when they see these shadow entities, it looks like a person, like a human figure. Sometimes they're wearing clothes, a hat, whatever, but it's a physical person. Well, we dream about more things than just people. We dream about cars, motorcycles, planes could be flying overhead in the dream. There could be bushes, trees in the dream. I've had dreams of being on stage with Motley Crue, and I've never woken up to 10,000 people in my room and the pyrotechnics going off and all that sort of stuff. As much fun as that would be, that hasn't happened. So it's not this idea of being a hallucination. Here's what I think is happening. Again, I believe two different phenomena happening can happen at the same time. This is the example I like to use, is that when a child wakes up in the middle of the night and they come into your room and they wake you up, whether they need, they had a bad dream or they need a glass of water or they need to use the bathroom, whatever it is. Sometimes, a lot of times they tap you on the shoulder or shake you and you get up and you help them out. But sometimes they don't do that. And they just stand there at the edge of the bed and they stare at you. And my youngest son, Cameron, was notorious for this. And I would just wake up sometimes like, oh my God, Cameron, what are you doing? Because he'd be standing there staring at me. It would be creepy, and he'd say, well, I had a bad dream or I need to use the bathroom. Okay, fine. We'd go take care of it. But if he didn't touch me, what was it that woke me up? Well, I felt his presence. I felt his energy near me. We each have a toroidal field of energy that extends out from us several feet. And so when his energy field crossed mine, I was able to feel him near me, and that's what woke me up. I believe the same thing is happening with these shadow entities that, they're in our rooms. Sometimes they're in the corner, maybe at the end of the bed, edge of the bed, whatever. Their energy is crossing into our field of energy, and we feel that, and we wake up, and there's the shadow entity. And sometimes we're experiencing sleep paralysis because that's a natural biological phenomenon. Sometimes, we are experiencing sleep paralysis, but we wake up, we have the sleep paralysis going on. We see this, we don't usually think of it as a shadow figure when we wake up. We're thinking there's an intruder in the room. So all of a sudden the adrenaline starts flowing because there's this intruder that's in the room. And so it just becomes this, this rabbit hole that we've dive down. Everything starts to snowball after that. So we start having ideas of, this shadow that was in the room was evil and it was paralyzing me, and it was, you get into the whole like energy vampire thing, which some could be, but I think not as often as some people make out. I think that it's just you're feeling the energy, you're waking up. Sometimes you have this paralysis because the thing's there, and it's just usually just watching and observing. So that's my take on sleep paralysis.
That's a great answer. Great answer.
You worked on a television show called The Alaska Triangle, and the Alaska Triangle has kind of fascinated me, and I've done some research into it. Do you think that, so I've got kind of a two-part question here. Do you think that shadow people are more common there? And if so, do you think that they're harnessing power from the triangle itself?
It's a good question because there is a lot of interesting energy up there. For people that aren't familiar, the Alaska Triangle, just basically think of the Bermuda Triangle, but in Alaska. In fact, some people do refer to it as Alaska's Bermuda Triangle, where you have all these different strange disappearances and supernatural activity, a lot of UFO sightings and things like that. There are a number of hauntings up there. People do see shadow entities up there. Whether or not it's more is debatable because I don't think anybody's really keeping statistics on that. We did where I worked, because I worked in the Alaska Command Building on Elmendorf Air Force Base, and there was, it seemed like a resident shadow entity that was down there in that communications center. And I'm in the process of writing a book on the Alaska Triangle, so I'm covering this. But,
are you?
So what's interesting, though, is a lot of people tried to say that the building had once been a hospital, and that where we had everything set up was the morgue, or had been the morgue. And so this shadow entity was supposed to be, one of these spirits from a body that had been brought in. But doing some research on the building, it had never been a hospital. It has always been a command building. So where is this shadow entity coming from? I don't have an answer for that now. This has been 25 years now, at least. So over 25 years. Jeez, I'm getting myself here. But yeah, we witnessed that routinely down there in that communication center.
Wild, you had a question?
I've actually collected 4 questions. I'll try to. We'll see how far we get.
Sorry, only 2 per person.
Oh no! We always have to. What is it called? After hours or overtime?
Right.
Last call.
Last call.
Last call. We got a last call, baby. Okay. Okay. So the first 2 are kind of short and quick. So one thing I was like, okay. I'm gonna say a statement, but I'm gonna phrase it in as this way. Do you agree with me? And I think that shadow people and even UFOs, they're actually a lot more common than people think. I believe that we just don't interact with them or see them, but I believe we probably are in the same space as shadow people more often than we think. I don't think they're that rare, actually. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't think they're that rare. I mean, they're probably just as common as something like a UFO or a ghost or something like that. People will try to say that they've become more active lately because there's been more reports and there's been more sightings lately. So there must be something going on with the world, and I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of different factors play into that. One, I mean, there's just more people in the world now to be able to report activity. But 2, I think our popular culture, you could say whatever you want about some of the different television shows and what have you, but I think our popular culture and the internet over the last 25 years has done a lot to help people realize they're not alone in this world, that other people have had these experiences. So I think people are more willing now to share their experiences about all this different phenomena. So yeah, I think shadow entities are just as common as some of these other things.
Yeah, for example,
go ahead, Wild.
Oh, I'll just finish this one thing. So, for example, as far as UFOs, I actually think that at any given time, if you go outside and you look up, the sky is probably crawling with UFOs wherever you are. But I think they're either too small, they move too fast, or they're not in our visible spectrum. So that's kind of my thoughts on UFOs. I think they're actually a lot more common than people think. And so my thought is the same for shadow people. It's possible that during a given week, I'm just estimating that you may run into like 1 or 20 shadow people every week. That's how abundant I think they are. Looking at it like as a biological perspective, looking at real life animals and how abundant they are, and that's just kind of my hypothesis, basically.
Okay. And some of these things, if they're moving interdimensionally or if they're on some other plane of existence because our eyes only see through a certain, limited spectrum of light. So if they're on just another light spectrum, who knows how many could be around us right now.
Yeah, they can change the molecular structure, cloak and everything else, just like a UFO.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Billy Bishop a while back had asked a question about is it generational? And I was wondering, that's brought me thinking about that. Do you find that there's different generations of the same person having encounters?
Let me see if I understand what you're asking.
So like the mother and the daughter all seen.
Okay. So passing, so something within the DNA. There could certainly be something within the DNA that, because you see that with other things. Like a family of psychic mediums, that they all have a proclivity to be able to have these different abilities. So to be able to see better some of these shadow entities, or maybe even to attract them somehow. I mean, there could be something within somebody's DNA that gets passed down from generation to generation, that they have some genetic marker that maybe helps them a little bit. That could be possible.
So that would be, in your scenario, which I think is a good scenario, that would be like a mutation or an adaptation. So certain people, like for instance, we inherit eye color, we inherit what taste we could taste. So genetically, it is possible that like you're a person genetically, you have a small genetic advantage to see them, and you pass it down, and that could explain why different generations might have it.
Sure.
More intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, intuition.
Let's talk a little bit about your research into history with shadow people. What other cultures from way back when have reported these kind of things, and what are their beliefs?
Yeah, you see this. You actually see this a lot more often than we realize in our ancient cultures. So I was just in Egypt, and you asked about that earlier. They had a belief system where they had 7 different parts of the soul, and the one part of that was the kabit, or the shadow, and so that would remain here on Earth along with the Ka, while the other parts of the soul, like the Ba, would move on to the constellation of Orion after death. And you see some some depictions in their ancient artwork of the Ba birds are taking off, and here's the actual shadow, the kabit, hanging out by the tomb. So that was their interpretation of the soul. You see some Native American cultures, like the Choctaw, not all, but some, believe in multiple different parts of the soul. But like the Choctaw believed in 2 different parts of the soul: the inner shadow and the outer shadow. One would go on to the land of ghosts, after death, and the other would stick around here to roam around. So you see a lot of different cultures believing in similar types of things. Something I found fascinating is we were talking with sleep paralysis, or about sleep paralysis earlier, and all cultures from around the world basically had have reported this over the millennia. I mean, you could just pick a part of the world and they've talked about it. They gave it a different name. They may have some legend and lore that's surrounded, but they all talk about we talk about old hag syndrome, and waking up and seeing like the old hag sitting on your chest, or whether it was a ghoul, or there's some other things that people have woken up and seen sitting on their chest, and they all have a different, like I said, different legend and lore, but it's all essentially the same thing, where they wake up, they see the shadow, they see the witch, the old hag, whatever it is, and you see this passed down through millennia from all of these different cultures who supposedly didn't have any connection with each other. It goes all the way back to ancient Sumer and the demon, quote unquote demon, known as Alu. Of course, they thought of demons differently back then, and basically Alu, they called it a binding spirit. So it's kind of like the sleep paralysis thing, and it would, people would wake up and it would be hovering over them at night. And this thing, again, had no eyes, no face, nothing like that. It also didn't have any limbs, no arms and no legs, and it would be hovering over people at night, and you would actually invoke a good demon to combat Alu, which was the bad demon. So it's kind of interesting to see the dichotomy between good and bad demons.
Huh. It's very interesting, actually. It almost meshes with the jinn.
Well, in the jinn, it's kind of interesting because some of the different Arabic cultures, the jinn is essentially their type of shadow person. And when I was in Egypt there, my friend Mohammed, his son, was really into the jinn and the different Arabic ideas of shadow entities, and so he was kind of feeding me some information when I was out there about some of their beliefs, and it's kind of interesting because it's very similar to things that we report here. They just use different names for it.
Person in our chat room, Deanna Schoenstadt, who we've had on the show actually, she asks, do shadow persons have strength, like superhuman strength? Have you ever heard of any reports like that?
Interesting question. So, I mean, like the one that physically interacted with me, I mean, it just kind of simply crossed my arms across my body. So, certainly not superhuman. You hear about, I mean, with a lot of supernatural activity, you hear about people getting pushed or shoved or scratched and that sort of thing. Not necessarily superhuman. Kind of the physical interactions with shadow entities, they happen, but seem to be a bit more limited in nature. The one that I would say that was concerning was the show that we filmed for The Haunted, and this was 10 years ago now. Now, she was, Taliesin, the adult daughter, was routinely seeing a shadowy entity with red eyes in her closet and elsewhere around the house, but it was primarily the closet. And so, long story short, we did this cleansing for the house. We didn't see this entity at the time, but as we were doing the cleansing and Carl Johnson, demonologist, was out there, conducting the ceremony. He ended up doing a blessing over her. And when he did that, she all of a sudden doubled over in pain like she had just gotten punched in the gut and fell to the floor. We got her back up. She was okay, and we continued on. Going over my audio later, I'd caught an EVP right there that said die. So this thing was definitely like evil, nefarious sort of entity. Out of all the cases that I've worked on over the years, that's the one that's actually was deemed demonic. But was that superhuman in strength? I'm not sure if it was superhuman because, I mean, you could punch anybody in the gut. You know, me as a human, you know, of course I would never do that, but it would have had the same effect if I punched her in the gut. She would have fallen to the floor. So it was certainly, you know, malicious. I don't know about superhuman, though.
There is a hypothesis out there that shadow people are possibly time slipping. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a part in there in the book on time travelers. I do talk about the time slip at the Conjuring House. And there's an incident that happened with me that, to me it was interdimensional. Could possibly be a time slip. This was at a place called Johnny V's in Muskogee, Oklahoma. It was a restaurant out there. It's long since closed down. I have no idea what it is these days. But we're doing a paranormal investigation. We were just wrapping up the evening. A couple of guys were sitting up in the bar area. A couple others were out in the front restaurant area. And I decided to do a just final photo sweep of the restaurant. And as I'm walking through the door to the kitchen, there was all of a sudden this very quick shadow that just darted right across the room, and you heard this boom slam into the little side door, which was just this little flimsy metal door that waiters and waitresses would carry large trays of food through to the back dining room area. The interesting thing is that the door didn't move, even though you heard the slam of it. So, I call out to the others, you guys hear that? And they're like, yeah. I explained to them what happened. And for a moment, I thought that they were messing with me. Like, maybe they threw something at the door or whatever. And I walk outside the door. I'm looking around on the ground. There's nothing there. And even if they had thrown something at the door to kind of spook me or whatever, I would have seen the door move. But it didn't. So what actually happened here? And so I kind of really break this down in a Walk in the Shadows, and I have a nice little diagram that goes along with it. So what I think happened was when I walked into that kitchen, that shadow that was there was it was actually partially on some other plane of existence. It was coming from another dimension. Perhaps when I walked in, maybe it saw me as a shadow person, maybe it saw me as a ghost, have no idea. But I definitely spooked it. I scared it. And it took off across that room, which is another reason why I don't think all shadow people are evil, because that certainly wasn't evil. I scared it. And when it slammed into that door, perhaps on its plane of existence, and this could be something with time, it could be a time slip as well, perhaps on its plane of existence, it blew right through that door and it ran off into the dining room, and that door opened on its plane of existence or during its place in time. But because I'm in a different place in time, on a different plane of existence, I didn't see the door physically opened. But sound works on a different wavelength. It works on a different frequency. And so through the dimensions, that frequency was able to resonate. I was able to hear that. We actually covered that a little bit in the Alaska Triangle when we talked about the missing Douglas airplane and being able to hear that radio chatter perhaps through the portal.
Do you think that people can hear shadow people speaking?
Telepathically, you hear reports about some sort of thought transference, that people hear the voices of shadow entities. They don't have a physical mouth to be able to speak with, but people, when they do hear them, they talk about them hearing them telepathically.
One of our viewers mentioned earlier that when she was like 5 years old, she was in bed and she heard her Nana called her from downstairs, and she thinks that that this shadow person that she saw was just tricking her to go downstairs.
using her Nana's voice.
Right.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. But so what are your thoughts on the other things like black-eyed children and Slender Man and that kind of thing? My personal opinion about Slender Man is the thing didn't exist, but then what's creepypasta, that website, where people are encouraged to write fiction. And that's where it all started. But so many people came to believe in it that I think they willed it into existence. That's just my personal opinion. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that's the idea of Slender Man now being a thought form tulpa. So it's an ancient Buddhist concept of being able to generate your own thought form, create a sentient being through your thoughts. And so, yeah, there's an idea out there that Slender Man could be that now. It did start as a piece of fiction. Basically, it was a Photoshop contest on the Something Awful forums, and he submitted those couple of photos, added a little bit of story element to the photos, and everybody loved it, and so they jumped on board. And he created other photos. Other people started creating their photos and adding to the lore, and it blew up into this huge thing. So the question now is, is that now its own sentient being? Is it really out there? And what's interesting is I do in the book. This was another one of the additions to the second edition. And I actually caught the story in, of all places, John Keel's book on the Mothman, and it has nothing to do with the Mothman. But in the very beginning of the book, he's talking about a haunting in New York, in Greenwich Village, in which Walter B. Gibson, who under the pseudonym Maxwell Grant, had written the Shadow stories. And after he had moved out, people started seeing this shadow entity throughout the house. And paranormal investigators who came in were trying to attribute it to like an old Revolutionary War soldier or something like this, because it was wearing the hat. But what John Keel suggested, as did Walter B. Gibson, was that because Gibson had written this story so many times, he was the Shadow was huge back in the 1930s. The 1930s Pulp Fiction, and became the radio show and all that. Because it was so huge, and he was writing constantly, that his own thoughts created the Shadow tulpa in this house, and now it was its own sentient being roaming around the house. So, very, very interesting. Could the same thing be true of Slender Man? It's possible. We'd actually have to try to hunt down the Slender Man tulpa and figure it out if it exists.
It started out as somebody's story, but manifested by the mind manifesting it, by creating it even more. The more you feed it, the bigger and stronger it gets. It's like with anything else, be it good or bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, we are going to have to get out of here for the night because we have to jump over to our Patreon page where we do our last call for our patrons. And so speaking of that, if you would please visit our Patreon page. It's in the description, and it's only $5 a month, and you get a lot of extra content. So, but anyway, Mike, thank you so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate you jumping on board today.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. It's always a good talk.
Mike, could you plug where people can buy your books and your website? People have to
absolutely.
read. Yeah.
Well, definitely check out. Definitely check out the Shadow Dimension docuseries on Tubi. You can watch that for free. 6-part docuseries. So tubitv.com and just look up Shadow Dimension, or if you have the app on your TV or your phone or whatever. And then my book, A Walk in the Shadows, you can get that on Amazon. Of course, you go to my website, MikeRicksecker.com, and find that book and all my other books.
And I've got all those links listed in the description as well.
Great. And then there's my new project, the Connected Universe Portal.com, which has a lot of the behind-the-scenes material from the Shadow Dimension, and then has all my Egypt stuff, plus a whole bunch of other extras and extra content, a bunch of articles and things like that.
Fantastic. All right, guys, let's get out of here. Viewers, thank you very much for watching. And as always, please like and subscribe. We'd love to see the big thumbs up. But anyway, we do need to get out of here because we're starting the last call portion of this in just about 10 minutes, I guess. But
Thanks,
until next
Mike.
time.
Thanks
Until
so
next
much.
time,
Thanks.
keep thinking, question everything.
Bye.